This client came to counseling to seek assistance with problems at work and home, both initiating and completing tasks, which has led to some impairment with meeting required daily goals. She also stated that she's struggling in her personal life when it comes to making meaningful connections when trying to go on dates. In an initial interview, she stated that she has begun to avoid interfacing with her managers as much as possible, as well as deleting any dating apps that she has been using on her phone. This will be the client's fourth session with the therapist. Hi, Haley. How are you today?
Hi, doing pretty good. Still decompressing from the week, but overall in a good mood.
Yeah, so it's so nice to have a nice Saturday. This weather's perfect.
Mhm.
How's your heart this week? I know we're wrapping up. How are you feeling?
Good, it's feeling good. I guess hopeful. Today, no complaints, but obviously that's subject to change.
Yeah, yeah. Um, by now, probably you know by now. I always ask this. What color are you feeling like today, if you had to pick one?
Um, I'm gonna go with bright orange.
Bright orange. Do you like the color orange? Like, do you use it in your daily life? Like, what does that mean to you today?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I would usually choose to wear, but I think because I'm in a generally good mood today, when I see that color out and about, it always just makes me feel good or happy. So that was just the first one that came to mind.
Yeah, I think the same thing. It's nice to have certain emotional connections to colors that, maybe you can lean on them from time to time. Um,
Hmm.
So I thought we would start this session by following up from kind of how we ended last session. I know that we decided a short-term goal for you is that you wanted to work on was to tackle some of your insecurities and avoidance in your love life as more of an immediate goal. We decided that you're comfortable enough to attempt going on a date, and our strategy leading up to the date would be using a thought journal. To write out your thoughts anytime that you began to feel anxious about it. Did that feel effective?
Um, yeah, the date went really well, and we had briefly discussed potentially meeting up later this week or maybe next weekend. I'm not sure, but that was good. I do think the thought journal really helped, though. It really helped me get out a lot of my anxieties and keep them on the page where they belonged instead of bringing them into the date, which I think was really, really helpful. I did notice, though, I was kind of rereading it before our session today, and it seemed like all the hypothetical scenarios in here that I was afraid of were things that were basically, I don't know, just something went wrong during the date. And in general, I was kind of the one that was at fault for it. So, I mean, it's obvious to me that I was maybe afraid of failing. I'm not really sure what that means, just because in every single situation, the failure was completely different, and I don't really know where that comes from, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say I'm really proud of you for following through on that date. I know that your disposition about doing that um, since our last session was, you were pretty nervous about it, even though you weren't feeling negatively at the time, you were kind of anticipating that. So I think following through as well as actually using your journal um, was a really great step for you. It's a great tool. Like you said, you're able to kind of provide a place for your anxiety and put it somewhere, not only to just have a safe space for it, but also to kind of look back at later. And it sounds like you got some really great insight out of it. Um, just from like a psychoeducation standpoint, a journal is a really, really cathartic tool. It's really heralded to be like one of the best, and some consider only ways to provide yourself some like effective catharsis. So if you end up feeling like you need to use that at a future time for a different reason, I think you should really always keep it handy. Um, from the latter part of what you were saying, though, I think we're kind of getting into a bit of the meat of maybe what some of your problems might be centering around, as
Mhm.
far as feeling like you might fail or that you're failing or that the problem's coming from you, without really knowing where that's coming from or how to really describe it. And so I was wondering, maybe at this point in our relationship, it might be helpful to do what we call a lifestyle assessment, which helps provide insight into certain private logics about early recollections of relationships, like with your parents, that might have led to this fear of failure that could, potentially be related. Does that sound like something you are interested in doing?
Yeah, I'm open to that.
Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Um,
Hmm.
Maybe you could describe for me what your relationship with your parents was like as a child.
Um, you know, my parents, it kind of felt like weren't very warm to me unless I kind of served a certain purpose to them. So, like completing chores or doing certain actions. And even so, they had really, really high standards for them. So if I didn't do them to that degree, I wasn't really going to get the warmth that I was seeking as a child. So I mean, it just really felt very transactional.
Yeah, that's tough. I know that you're from the South, and that's not an uncommon thing necessarily, but even if your parents love you, warmth is certainly something that impacts kind of how you start to view things. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um, would you say that they with you were indulgent? Were they strict, consistent, inconsistent, supportive in certain areas? If you had to use one of those words, how would you describe them?
Yeah, when you said strict, that really kind of feels like it really encompasses my relationship with them. Um, yeah, I just really kind of feel like everything I had to be earned as opposed to just was given to me, which I think felt weird because, you know, um, as a kid, you would think that just being their child, you would kind of get some of those things just as a de facto of that situation. But I really felt like I had to work for it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that kind of leads into my next question, which is, you said you were having to work, you felt like you had to work for things. And, I just kind of wondered, how did you get what you needed as a kid, really? And, or what you wanted, where do you feel like you had an awareness of your own needs and wants?
I guess all my familial memories are really centered around working and being productive. So I don't really remember that ever being a focus in my life. And even so, there was no chance that I would get what I needed or wanted if I didn't first satisfy those things that my parents were kind of asking of me. So it just really didn't seem like a priority.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for sharing, Natalie. I mean, I know that some of this information can be provocative. Um, and yeah, so I think moving forward, we're going to be unpacking some of this information
Mhm.
over our next few sessions together. And rather than just try to isolate all of the particular issues or things that might have come up or be related from this information right now, I think it might be really helpful if we use our journaling tool that we already have. And I'm just thinking if it's an effective tool for you, perhaps what we can do to, again, kind of help tie in different ways of providing a place for things and reflection. Um, we Something that goes along with that too is a sense of language, and I know with some of these things you're mentioning having trouble putting them into words, and so perhaps we can use some of these art supplies that I have here, as well as that journal that I gave you you've been working on, to try to help illustrate some of these things, or disrupt the page, use different colors, assign certain shapes or colors to certain feelings. I just really want you to kind of experiment with some of this as you kind of reflect upon this information coming up for you, in a way that we can collaborate in our next session and start to think through what some of it might all mean.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much
Mhm.
for coming in. And I'm excited that you will be going on another date with this person. And I hope that we can continue to have updates on that as well. All right.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks
Yeah.
so much.
So
Bye
see you.
bye.
Bye. I chose an Adlerian counseling approach because it is something that seems fairly concise and straightforward, which I believe I've been leaning more towards when considering my future role in healthcare. Meaning, I want to have a functional tool belt for when experiences with clients are rather limited. This theory, in this case, was evidenced by a strong use of working to establish an egalitarian relationship and making a positive, warm, meaningful connection to help them feel a sense of belonging with focus on strengths and modeling better ways of coping. We also began examining the client's lifestyle and how some of her current insecurities and basic mistakes might be connected to some of her earlier recollections and relationships with her parents. This approach might look differently than someone who might, in addition, be utilizing a cognitive behavioral therapy backing, where the focus of the therapy sessions would be on the client's cognitions, thinking patterns around her relationships, and tasks as the change agent, rather than analyzing the source of how and why the client might operate this way. This client is from Southern background. She's both a lesbian and a woman with partially Hispanic sociocultural and genetic heritage. These layers of the client's identity inform how she must navigate the world at large as well as within the therapeutic relationship. This is where I believe a well-established egalitarian relationship can function well. Strengths of this approach is I consider strengths of this approach to be around the focus of collaborative understanding of the client and the focus on their connection with other people. It seems like it will serve well in this case, in which early parental relationships might inform quite a bit of the client's current impairments. One limitation of this approach is the focus on the subjective reality of the client. I perceive potential barriers for organizing collaborative change with this client when focusing on her reality while only being able to offer humble feedback. Though she has much insight, the client began to suggest a bit of a struggle with communication around her emotions tied to some of these experiences. I decided to suggest transforming the journal tool, which is already being used as a method for self-understanding, and provide a different access point for creative language beyond English in this case, that we might be able to interpret together at our next session.